Arron Banks gave or lent more than £8 million to various Brexit organisations during the referendum.
What would you like to say to us?
Indeed, he's thought to be the biggest single donor to any campaign in British history. But now the Electoral Commission has referred him and his funding to the National Crime Agency, the highest police body in the land. The Commission say they've reasonable grounds to suspect that Mr. Banks and his firms were not the true source of the £8 million, that he and others concealed the true details of these financial transactions, and that various criminal offences may have been committed. Arron Banks shot to fame 4 years ago when he announced from the lawn of his lavish country home that he was giving £1 million to UKIP.
Well, someone has to fund us. You know, we have to have money. We haven't got.
It was the size of that gift and his cheeky manner which prompted questions then and ever since as to how rich Banks really is and how he made his money.
Point as well. I'm a self-made person. I made my money from a desk and 2 telephones. So I resent your kind of comment that I'm some sort of rich Tory.
The Electoral Commission today said they don't have the powers to investigate Mr. Banks' Isle of Man company, Rock Holdings, or his companies based in Gibraltar, all of which by law are banned from funding British election campaigns as they're offshore. And recently the question has also arisen as to whether the funds for Brexit really came from Russia. In his book, Banks reveals he had a 6-hour boozy lunch, his words, at the Russian embassy with the ambassador. And it's since emerged there were other meetings at which Banks was offered the chance to take part in lucrative deals involving gold mines and diamonds. Kathy Newman recently asked the Russian ambassador about it.
And he was one of the persons, whom we meet because, I was curious why he's giving so much money.
Then there's the Southern African connection. Earlier this year, Channel 4 News investigated several diamond mines in the region, which Mr. Banks had once said were one source of his wealth.
Diamond mines?
Diamond mines, yes, in Kimberley. We own 7 mines there, not all of them, but there's quite a cluster. And,
what's that worth?
Quite a lot.
But we found several mines shut and evidence they'd been losing money and struggled to pay wages.
You understand that there's no people coming, there's no production there.
No production at all?
No production at all.
In court documents, Banks' former business partner in the mines claimed Banks had tried to plug the financial hole with Russian cash. But some of those funds, he alleged, were diverted to pay for Brexit.
The Leave campaign won the referendum.
Arron Banks has always denied such allegations, but when MPs tried to ask him about the source of his wealth earlier this summer, he ended up walking out.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but there it is.
Mr. Banks, who's fishing in Bermuda right now, today issued this statement.
I am pleased that the Electoral Commission has referred me to the National Crime Agency. I am confident that a full and frank investigation will finally put an end to the ludicrous allegations levelled against me and my colleagues. There is no evidence of any wrongdoing from the companies I own. I am a UK taxpayer and I have never received any foreign donations. The Electoral Commission has produced no evidence to the contrary. The Electoral Commission has referred me to the National Crime Agency under intense political pressure from anti-Brexit supporters.
When I got hold of Arron Banks on the telephone this afternoon, he insisted that all the money he gave and lent to the Brexit campaigns was ultimately his money. The profits, in large part, he says, of his insurance business, in which he has 500,000 motoring customers and a turnover of more than £250 million a year. And he complained that the allegations that the Electoral Commission was making had not been put directly to him before they sent them to the National Crime Agency. But the Electoral Commission replied to us tonight that they've had extensive correspondence with Mr. Banks on these matters and his colleague Elizabeth Bilney. Their answers changed over time, the Commission told us, and company accounts and bank account records, they allege, were not consistent with what they said.
Michael Crick reporting. Well, earlier I spoke to Damien Collins MP, who chairs the Digital, Culture, Media and Sports Committee. The panel recently summoned Arron Banks to give evidence for its inquiry into fake news and disinformation. I began by asking him whether he felt vindicated by today's announcement of a formal investigation.
Well, yes, the concern we expressed in our committee report in the summer, it would seem is shared by the Electoral Commission as well. We said that if it wasn't clear what the real source of the funds were that allowed Arron Banks to make these very large donations to Leave.eu, then it should be referred to the National Crime Agency to investigate. And the Electoral Commission have come to the same conclusion.
And these allegations, of course, you've looked into the truth behind these allegations. You yourself haven't been able to come up with any answers about where this money came from.
Well, no. When Arron Banks gave evidence to the committee, we weren't convinced by his answers that it was at all clear what the source of the money was. He seemed to have a series of businesses that didn't really seem to make any money. Businesses that had been sold by him, again, didn't seem to have brought much of a gain. So that's why we said it wasn't clear based on the evidence we'd received. And the NCA have got greater powers than we have as a parliamentary committee, and they should investigate if it wasn't clear.
Right.
And obviously the Electoral Commission share the same view.
What's clear in Arron Banks' mind is that he sees this all as a political campaign by people like you to derail Brexit.
Well, it's actually very simple. If he was able to demonstrate to the Electoral Commission what the real source of his funds were, then it wouldn't have been referred. And the Electoral Commission are not just referring it on the basis of doubts they have. They've been very specific that they don't believe that all the funds came from him. And they've named a business in the Isle of Man which they believe was one of the sources of these funds.
I mean, your committee has taken these allegations very seriously. Is one of the big problems for you that the government, that Theresa May, the Prime Minister, doesn't want to touch these allegations with a barge pole for political reasons?
Well, I think political reasons shouldn't stop the investigation of potential breaches of the law. The electoral law is important and it exists and it must be enforced. I think the government will probably say, though, that the correct enforcement here is not by ministers but by the relevant investigatory authorities. And I'm glad that at long last we now have the NCA looking at these issues.
But you can't divorce this from politics. I mean, Arron Banks thinks it is entirely politically motivated.
Well, I think he's doing that to offer up something of a smokescreen, to try and make out that he's some sort of a victim. But why should it be that if someone who's a highly connected political person may have committed electoral offences, why shouldn't they be investigated? Why is politics an excuse not to investigate somebody?
Let me ask you very bluntly, if it can be proven at the end of the day that there was foreign interference of one form or another in the referendum, should the result of that referendum be scrapped?
Well, I think there are two really important things here. Firstly, the investigations into individuals or campaigns that have done wrong, and if they have, they should face charges and prosecution for offences if they have committed them. The issue of whether that affects the outcome of the referendum as a whole is ultimately not a decision for the police or the National Crime Agency. That ultimately is a decision for the British people and for Parliament. And I don't think we could really speculate on that until we know whether these offences have been committed.
Damien Collins, thank you very much.
Thank you.